I used to live in a small duplex apartment in upstate New York. It was nothing special, just a cheap place I could afford while finishing school. My neighbor on the other side was an older man named Frank. He kept to himself, never said more than a polite hello in passing. I figured he was harmless, but late at night, I'd hear things. Heavy footsteps pacing his living room, long after midnight. Sometimes I'd hear furniture dragging across the floor. Once, I could have sworn I heard whispering, like a low voice muttering words I couldn't make out. One night, around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed when I heard a strange sound coming from the basement that both apartments shared. It was a knock, slow and rhythmic, like someone tapping on the wooden beams. I got up, opened my door, and looked down the stairs. The basement was pitch black, but I saw the faint glow of a flashlight moving around there. I thought maybe Frank was fixing something, but why at that hour? I started down the steps quietly just to see. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air smelled foul, like mold mixed with something metallic. I stopped halfway when I saw Frank. He was standing completely still in the middle of the basement, holding a flashlight in one hand and staring at the far corner. I followed his gaze and noticed the old wooden door that led to a storage room. Only the door was rattling, as if something inside was trying to push its way out. I froze. My gut told me to back away. Frank slowly turned his head toward me, and in that dim glow, his face looked almost lifeless. He said, "You shouldn't be down here." I bolted back upstairs and locked my door. The knocking continued for another 10 minutes before stopping. The next morning, I worked up the courage to peek into the basement again. The flashlight was gone. The storage door? Wide open. Inside was nothing but an empty concrete room. 2 weeks later, Frank moved out without saying a word. I never found out what was behind that door, or why it sounded like something was trapped in there. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood. For years, the house next door was empty until a woman moved in. She was maybe in her late 40s, thin, pale, always wearing long dresses that looked out of place for the season. At first, she seemed normal. She waved politely from her porch, but she never really talked. My mum even baked her cookies once, but when she went over, the woman just cracked the door open, whispered, "Thank you," and shut it quickly. Then strange things started happening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see her silhouette standing in her upstairs window, just staring into our yard. No movement, no lights on, just her figure against the curtain. One night, I was outside taking the trash out when I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone calling my name. I looked up, and sure enough, she was at her window again. Only this time, I could see her face. She was smiling, but her mouth never moved. I ran back inside. My parents thought I was imagining things, but it escalated. A few nights later, I woke up to scratching sounds at my bedroom window. When I looked, there were faint lines etched into the glass, like someone had been tracing shapes with a sharp object. The final straw came one morning when my mum found a folded note on our porch. It said in shaky handwriting, "She wants to come inside your house too." That same night, police cars showed up next door. We never learned the details, only that the woman was taken away. The house has been empty ever since, but even now, sometimes I catch myself glancing at that upstairs window, and once in a while, I swear I still see her silhouette. Back when I lived in a cheap apartment complex, my neighbor was a middle-aged guy named Derek. He seemed friendly at first. He'd say hi, ask about my day, but after a while, I noticed he had this odd habit of knocking on my door at strange hours. The first time, it was 11 p.m. He said he needed to borrow some sugar. I brushed it off. The second time, it was nearly 1 a.m. He asked if I had duct tape. Then, another time, at 3 in the morning, he claimed he heard a weird noise in my unit and wanted to check. I always politely turned him away, but something about it felt off. One night, I was watching TV around midnight when I heard the knock again. 3 slow knocks. I didn't answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Then I heard his voice. "I know you're in there." I froze. My heart was pounding. I stayed quiet. One night, I was watching TV around midnight when I heard the knock again. 3 slow knocks. I didn't answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Then I heard his voice. "I know you're in there." I froze. My heart was pounding. I stayed quiet. A week later, he suddenly moved out. The landlord later told me why. Apparently, another tenant in the building had reported the same thing. Derek knocking on their door late at night, trying the handle. When police investigated his apartment, they found a small box hidden under his bed. Inside were labeled bags of hair, different colors, lengths. The officer said it looked like he'd been collecting them. I'll never forget that night, hearing the sound of my doorknob turning slowly in the dark. When I was in college, I rented a cheap house with 2 other students. It was a decent place, but the house next door was weird. It was owned by a man in his 60s named Mr. Gray. He always kept his curtains drawn, never had visitors, and the only time we saw him outside was when he took his trash out at exactly the same time every night. One evening, my roommate and I were in our backyard when we heard a strange noise coming from his house. It was faint at first, like tapping. Then, it turned into what sounded like muffled crying. We froze, listening. The sound was definitely coming from inside his house. A few days later, curiosity got the better of us. My roommate managed to peek through a small gap in his curtains. She swore she saw a young woman sitting in a chair, facing the wall, completely motionless. We didn't know what to do. Call the police? Tell the landlord? Before we could decide, the noises stopped. For weeks, his house was silent. Then one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to flashing red and blue lights outside. Police cars were parked in front of Mr. Gray's house. We watched from our porch as they escorted him out in handcuffs. Later, we learned he had been keeping someone locked in one of his rooms, a missing person. The detail that stuck with me? The girl had been seen at the window several times by neighbors, but every time she'd vanish before anyone could prove it. I moved out a few months later, but I'll never forget living next to that house. Every time I walk by it now, I still imagine the faint sound of crying behind those closed curtains.